pick up your biggest two-hander and deal some massive executes, destroy the meters, and be the first on the overall DPS detail window, because that's what it's all about. But it's also about learning how to play warrior. How are you going to play warrior arms? That is, well, this is how you play arms warrior, by watching this video, because of course we go through the talents, the gear, the rotation, stats, and all the things that you need so you can start doing some dungeons and raids at whatever difficulty you wish and get some loot, because at the end of the day, that's what's important. First of all, let's check out the talents. As with all the guys that we do, the talent builds are linked down in the description, so you can just pick them up and import them into your game. And right now on the video, we will talk about some of the specific talents and how they interact with each other, so it can give you a better idea of how to approach Arms Warrior, whether it is in single target, cleave, or AoE, or anything like that. In terms of rating, specifically for single target fights, which are the majority of ones, this is what you're looking at. When it comes to the general talent tree, it's 80% what you're going to be using all over the place. You might notice some differences, with Inspiring Presence being a really good option to take, since it definitely helps you be a valuable part in your raid by increasing the rallying cry's duration by 3 seconds and granting 5% additional HP. Definitely something that warriors are very valued for when it comes to raiding. As for the actual spec talents, assuming that you're going to be using your tier set, because at this point we're in the 5th, 6th week already in 10.1.5, you should probably have enough catalyst charges to get your 4 set. If not, you can probably get the 4 set fairly easy, but it's better to just talk about once you have the tier set as to what your talents are going to be. And this is what you're looking at for the maximum amount of single target damage. You're of course going to be using all the way down to the left hand side for Fatality, the capstone that makes Mortal Strike and Cleave, mostly Mortal Strike, against enemies above 30% health, have a high chance to apply Fatal Mark. When an enemy falls below 30% health, your next execute inflicts additional damage. Some key talents on the right hand side is Strength of Arms, where Overpower has a 10% increased critical strike chance, deals 10% increased critical strike damage, and on enemies below 35% health, Overpower generates 8 rage. And since zigzagging is the way to go, on the left hand side again, Bloodletting is also a key talent that's going to make your rotation smoother, where Deep Wounds and Rend and Thunderous Roars bleed effects last 6 seconds longer. Sure, that's fairly standard, but what's important here is that if you have Rend talented, of course, Mortal Strike inflicts Rend on targets below 35% health. This is very useful in execute windows, and we're gonna talk about this in the actual rotation. And obviously you're going to finish it off with Executioner's Precisions on the bottom right hand side of the talent tree, where execute causes the target to take 35% more damage from your next Mortal Strike, stacking up to 2 times. When we go into cleave situations, when there's 2 targets, when there are ads that you want to take care of, you don't change much. In the spec talent tree, you'll definitely be swapping from Strength of Arms to improved Sweeping Strikes, so Sweeping Strikes can last 6 seconds longer. Fairly self-explanatory. You want that extra cleave for that extra damage, which is what Arms specializes in. On the general talent tree, you can also change from Inspiring Presence to potentially Intervene, moving around from as that spawn, let's say, I don't know, on experiments or things like that. Maybe you can just charge or intervene to an ally and then just be in range of the mob, cleave it down, go back onto the main boss. Either way, this helps to give you some variety in terms of movement. And getting to your allies is important, because that's how you make great things happen, like the content on our channel with the lovely support of our patrons. If you like this content, you want to see more of it, consider checking the Patreon link down in the description. You'll find a lot of goodies, and you'll be supporting more of these videos to come into the future. We are super grateful for it. Let's take a look at the AoE talents, which in terms of changes, there's a couple in the general talent tree. You will most likely give up Bounding Strikes to take stuff like Storm Bolt and Seismic Reverberation, which makes a lot of sense. First of all, Storm Bolt is a really good single target stun, definitely useful in Mythic Plus, where you have targets that you need to stop, either casting, moving, or attacking, or running away, or anything like that. While Seismic Reverberation makes Whirlwind, if it hits 3 or more targets, to hit them again for 30% more damage, which of course is just more damage. Overall, very good. In terms of the class talent tree, you'll swap quite a bit. First of all, you will not be playing Fatality anymore, and you probably will be putting that point into maybe Bloodborne, which is at a little bit higher up for more bleed damage, which is always really good. And in the middle side of the talent tree is probably where you're going to see most amount of changes. You will be swapping from Strength of Arms to In for the Kill for a little bit more haste. And you'll be getting Warbreaker, of course, for the AoE Colossus Smash application. And you'll keep going down into Blade Storm, because, you know, it's AoE, you cannot have AoE with Blade Storm, and take the Capstone Hurricane, which is going to make it so good for you to Blade Storm back to back to back, which is amazing because it gives you a high uptime on the buff, considering that on the general talent tree, you'll be playing Avatar that procs a Blade Storm every time you use it. On the right-hand side, you'll still have Executioner's Precision because it's pretty good to do execute damage, but you will be losing stuff like Critical Thinking and Juggernaut. These are the main talent swaps that you'll be going with. You can probably change one or two at the higher up, but we probably wouldn't recommend it. But at the end of the day, you can just play and test out what you want. Now that you have your talents, in terms of stats, as always, you'll need to sim, and we have simming guides on our channel that you can check out and get a better understanding of what your stats are and what your gear is, and you can pretty much sim this entire section of the guide. But if you are not really keen on doing that, because not a lot of people like third-party stuff, the stat priority that you should be following is Strength, aka eye level first, and then you put Critical Strike on top, Haste, Mastery, and Versatility last. If you gear up in this order in terms of your secondary stats, you should be good to go. As for the enchants, your weapon will have your Sophic Devotion, which is going to be the strongest enchant for your weapon. Put Awakening stats on your chest, a Frosted Armor kit on your legs, and on the Cloak and Bracers, Graceful and Devotion Avoidance appropriately, while the belt will have the Shadowed Belt clasp with boots, Watcher's Loam. Putting both stamina on both pieces will give you a little bit more tankiness, while on the rings you'll put Devotion of Critical Strike to kind of go hand in hand with your stat priority. And let's not forget that even though they're not actual enchants, the Inscribed Limited Diamond and the Crafty Emerald will be your primary gems to use in your socket, with Inscribed being obviously more important because it is the one and only main stat gem that you can only have one of, so you should probably start putting gems with this one and then continue on to Crafty Emerald and so on. In terms of the actual consumables that you'll be stuffing into your face, Feasts is always ideal because, you know, you gotta eat, but, you know, feasts are not always available, so Deviously Deviled Eggs, Deviled Eggs, I always say the other one, is going to be your source of primary stat that we would recommend, but you can also go with Feisty Fish Sticks for that secondary crit. Always use a Phial of Tepid Versatility and, of course, an Elemental Potion of Ultimate Power as your DPS potion of choice whenever you're bursting down ads or bursting down bosses or executing down bosses. This is going to be really good. And, of course, let's finish it off with a Buzzing Rune for your weapon for that extra crit consumable just to be added. And speaking of weapon, although not really just weapon, but the gear that you want, obviously the highest priority possible is your tier set because that's going to be a bigger source of your power, but you can also get embellishments, and the reason why they're less important is because you want to put embellishment around your tier pieces when you craft the gear. As for the actual embellishments, Shadow Flame Tempered Patch is the best one to have in single target, and you'll have 2 of them if your main goal is to raid and do boss damage. You can also have some multi-target options when it comes to embellishments, which are Allied Wrist Guards of Companionship and the Lariat, which is a little bit more generic and has more uses than just pure single target. And yes, Lariat is still good even after the nerfs. Obviously, you want as many sockets as possible, but it's still going to be a good source of haste. Your weapon is, of course, going to be Ashkandar, Fall of the Brotherhood, the best weapon in the game, the one that you should be looking for, the one that you should be getting. Otherwise, just get whatever higher level weapon you loot from any other source in the game. Trinkets are a weird situation. As with all the other specs in the game in this season, raid trinkets are just bonkers, and they're definitely going to be your best trinkets. And if you do end up raiding and having your pick of the litter, Ominous Chromatic Essence and Elementium Pocket Anvil are some of the 2 best trinkets that you can get in the raid, with a little bit of a caveat, of course. The Chromatic Essence is really good if you have more people that use it, and the Pocket Anvil is really good if you're in a prolonged fight. Usually that's going to be a raid fight, although, you know, sometimes it can happen in Mythic Plus where you just pull back-to-back pulls. The Pocket Anvil can be good. Alternatively, easier to use and less restrictive is the Phial of Animated Blood that drops from Underrot, of course, or, you know, your vault. It does give you a super high chunk of stats, and it aligns really well with Avatar, which is really good. But if you really want to min-max the best, one of the best trinkets, a little bit less so than Ominous Chromatic Essence, is the Beacon of the Beyond or Beacon to the Beyond. This is usually harder to get and it has only real applications in single target, but it is your probably second best single target trinket. If you can get this, keep it, it's really good. The opener rotation for Arms Warrior is fairly similar and simplistic as it is for Fury and likely as it is for Protection as well. You want to make sure that you charge in for that Rage and Gap Closer, apply your Rend, and then apply your Mastery through, most of the time, Colossus Smash or War Breaker, depending if it's AoE or single target. This is a fairly standard opener that you're going to be using no matter what, and then you normally just follow your priority depending on the target count. For single target, obviously the most important one is going to be Rend, especially if you want to refresh it when there's 4 or fewer seconds of the debuff remaining to hit that pandemic window. Use Colossus Smash on cooldown, Mortal Strike on cooldown, most important cooldowns to use, Thunderous Roar during Test of Might or in for the kill buff windows only if you're gonna be casting it here, and then Execute to consume your sudden death procs. Moving further down the priority list, Overpower should be used to make sure that you never cap on the 2 charges, or as soon as you get 2 charges, use that Overpower. Use Ignore Pain to dump any excess rage, especially when it's off global cooldown. Sometimes your rage generation can be way too much, and then Ignore Pain is going to come in handy to dump some of that so that it can factor into anger management. Whirlwind next, considering that you have the Storm of Swords talent, since that's what we recommended you take. Thunderclap as another source of rage dump, and then Overpower if it just has 1 charge that came off cooldown. And lastly, if you really need a filler, use Slam. And as you fight the single target boss, you will inevitably reach the Execute phase, which has its own priority, starting with Rend, once again similar to the single target priority, followed up by Avatar and Colossus Smash, ideally casted at the same time always. Thunderous Roar, once again during the Test of Might or in for the kill buff windows, depending on which one you took. Ignore Pain to prevent you from over-generating rage and wasting some of it. Overpower when you're below 40 rage, because now Overpower will generate rage, remember the talent Bloodletting. Mortal Strike with 2 stacks of Execution Precision, or to refresh Deep Wounds, which is your Mastery, so that's the only time you'll be casting Mortal Strike. And Execute as the main spender with Overpower as a filler if there's nothing else to do during Execute. In AoE, the priority will remain fairly similar, where you have Thunderclap at the very top to apply Rend to as many targets as possible. Use your Warbreaker to apply Colossus Smash and Avatar together with it so that the Blade Master's Torment, aka the Blade Storm, happens immediately as you do so. You'll use Thunderous Roar during your Colossus Smash or Hurricane windows, because you are using those talents, and then once Colossus Smash ends, you'll be using Blade Storm. Sweeping Strikes when Blade Storm is not going to be available, and then you Mortal Strike your priority target. You'll use Overpower as soon as it gets its second charge, Whirlwind to dump your Rage, Execute to spend Rage and buff Mortal Strike if targets are getting low, and then you'll be using Thunderclap to spend any excess rage if needed, Overpower as a filler, and lastly, Ignore Pain to just dump any additional rage that you have. These are some simple tips when it comes to the rotation, so you can get the hang of arms and actually do really well in combat. There's obviously more things that you can improve. Ideally, during the priority rotation, which we didn't mention, Avatar is always going to be used as soon as it becomes available. That's really good practice to do. While you have your tier set, your rotation does not change whatsoever, so don't worry too much about it. When it comes to target situations, aka a boss and an ad, your rotation just remains the same, but you will be adding Sweeping Strikes so that you can cleave to the second target and you don't change anything else. And a more generic tip, if you've just started playing your arms and you have like nothing on you, you can craft your weapon if you have the sparks, and you probably should. If you have no real chance of looting of Ashkander anytime soon, or having a vault with a really high level weapon, probably crafting your weapon is the most important thing you can do with the new crafting system. Hope all of this information has been amazing for you to start picking up your arms and slap some things around. There are obviously more things that you can chase and more things that you can improve. We recommend hitting up the Skyhold Discord community. Shout out to the Prot Warrior boys and gals who are doing an amazing job at putting all the information out there for you if you want to get more advanced and more in-depth tips on arms, whether it is through their online written guides or through their actual chats where they respond to questions from different people, which is fantastic. Thank you for watching the video. If you do like our content, consider becoming a patron with the link down below, and we would be super grateful. Make sure to also check our Fury Warrior guide if by accident you loot a second two-hander weapon, so you can also smash around and swap a little bit of a playstyle and some fun all around.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classical retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.